U.S. Virgin Islands is reportedly seeking $190 million from JPMorgan Chase in the lawsuit over its banking relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. The case alleges that the bank financially benefited from Epstein's sex trafficking operation and failed to report, quote, suspicious financial activity, CNN writes.
The government for the U.S. Virgin Islands also said it wants JPMorgan Chase to implement an independent compliance consultant to prevent human trafficking and to separate its business and compliance functions, according to CNN. The Virgin Islands Department of Justice said JPMorgan should look into the, quote, root causes of the bank's failures in its banking relationship with Jeffrey Epstein and identifying the missed opportunities to report his criminal activities. So these new damages amounts are a result of a filing that just happened at the end of last week. So remember, we've been covering this obviously throughout, but that there was a lawsuit from the victims where he agreed to pay $290 million. In June of this year, Deutsche Bank settled a similar lawsuit with victims, agreeing to pay $75 million in May. But now this is a lawsuit that's being brought on behalf of the Virgin Islands itself. It alleges it's stepping in a kind of in the shoes of the citizens of the U.S. Virgin Islands, looking for these damages that have been the people of the islands have been subjected to, and they're specifically saying that they're looking for this significant multi-million-dollar, over $100 million amount. Now, the complaint alleges that the JPMorgan Chase executives had close personal relationships with Epstein and that the bank ignored red flags in order to continue doing business with them. The complaint reads, each of these red flags was serious. Together, they suggest a pattern of potentially illegal conduct that should have prompted action by JPMorgan. And as we've discussed, we've seen the exact opposite with some of the emails that have come out in the context of these litigations, where there do seem, in fact, to have been very close relationships with various senior people at JPMorgan. And the allegation here is that Epstein's relationships with other very high-profile folks like Bill Gates brought them into the bank, and that the bank profited specifically $40 million from Epstein acting as a go-between and bringing high-profile clients on board.
Right. The red flags are significant. They are present well after the time period in which Jeffrey Epstein is publicly known to be a sex criminal, to have been charged and arranged, convicted, pled, essentially worked out that it was confirmed that he was involved in these horrific charges with underage girls. And then they're still doing business with him, and they're still there's that one JPMorgan executive who has emails with him that describe a very close personal relationship. Honestly, that implies even something beyond that, this sort of mutual interest in some of the totally disgusting, perverted things that Epstein was into, and then his network of famous people who should have known better, certainly by that time period, Bill Gates, and now most recently we learned about the delegate of the U.S. Virgin Islands, Stacey Plaskett, who was seeking to have him involved in her fundraising right up until a year before he died in prison. Just no excuse for this. Totally willing to play ball with the devil at this point.
And we talked about how there were changes to U.S. Virgin law that apparently Jeffrey Epstein was pushing for, and locals were facilitating, local politics.
Having to do with the sex offender registry in the U.S. Virgin Islands, which I'm not a huge fan of the sex offender registry in general, but this is a pretty specifically agenda-driven reason by one individual to have it done.
Exactly. And you were referencing before Jess Staley, who was the former JPMorgan Chase and Barclays executive, who was discussing Disney characters, Snow White and Beauty and the Beast, in a series of emails with Jeffrey Epstein, and who allegedly also shared photographs of young women with the banker, according to
if there's ever someone for whom the sex offender registry exists to describe, it is Jeffrey Epstein. My opposition is that there are like people get put on it for urinating in public and for totally unsubstantiated. Actually, I was covering a reporter friend of mine was covering cases in the States, and I think in Arizona, where even with it was a child abuse issue where her kid was playing at the park, and so it's one of those neglect charges, but she was never charged. But then the process to find out if you go on this registry is an extra legal process that has nothing to do with the police, and they just decided to put her on it for like letting your kid play alone in the park.
That's, certainly there were abuses and
civil liberties
overreaches.
problems.
Right.
That's just a tangent.
But whatever you think the law should be,
there.
I think we can all agree that it shouldn't be dictated by someone who would be implicated by the law in some of the most serious ways. So with respect to that Disney colloquy, for those who forgot, it's interesting, kind of disturbing stuff. Apparently, Staley emailed Epstein in 2010 saying, "That was fun, say hi to Snow White." Epstein replied, "What character would you like next?" Staley replied, "Beauty and the Beast." And Epstein replied, "Well, one side is available according to the filing." So I can't even...
Was Gretel not available?
It seems pretty undeniable that this is a very familiar, friendly relationship. And then so how can you continue to claim that senior officials at JPMorgan were completely unaware of what Epstein was doing and that they blindly continued this relationship with him without knowing what they were potentially, in effect, facilitating?
I would like to learn more about the actual, what legally, how this works. This is the U.S. Virgin Islands, the territory, is suing JPMorgan. So not, as you said, so if let's say they recoup a bunch of money from JP, what are they? Is this being paid out to the victims? Does this go into the territory's treasury? Is it ever going to get a tax break after it? Do you know what I mean? I'm curious a little bit about.
Just briefly, and part of why we have this story was pegged to this new filing that I think had to do with the fact that they initially had asked for the damages to come in the form of taxes, and there was some legal reason why there had been a motion to dismiss on that, and so I think they re-upped the damages claim. They recharacterized their damages claim. I think that's, don't quote me specifically on that, but that seems to be at gloss why we're getting these new numbers about what kinds of money they're seeking. What happens to that money, how it's distributed, it's unclear. But what they are claiming specifically is that the bank profited $40 million specifically from Epstein and the clients that he brought from the bank, and then they're asking for another $150 in punitive damages.
Yeah, I mean, if they get back that money, let's make sure it's... making whole people who were wronged by Jeffrey Epstein.
Well, there were those the settlements for the victims earlier this year, but certainly I would hate it to enrich a government that had some members.
That's what I'm saying. Are they going to build a nicer presidential palace or whatever? Again, my knowledge of the U.S. Virgin Islands governmental structure is extremely low, so don't. But do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. You don't want to enrich people who also benefited from the relationship with Jeffrey Epstein.
For sure, which does sound like, and I bet if we or anyone else started looking more closely at it, it would be anomalous for it to be just Stacey Plaskett.
Sure.
One imagines that there are all sorts of government officials in the U.S. Virgin Islands who understood that Jeffrey Epstein was seeking to make this his personal fiefdom, to use and abuse people without any punishment, or for as long as he could, because it was financially beneficial for rich and powerful people, including the government of the U.S. Virgin Islands.
Yes, I mean, I think we talked about how Epstein paid for the Skidmore tuition of the first family of the Virgin Islands. Remember that?
Right. Yes.
And they had some other financial entanglements. Cecile DeJona, wife of then U.S. Virgin Islands Governor John DeJona Jr., sent Epstein an email in August 2011 with the subject line, "Please approve attaching a $25,000 tuition bill for Skidmore College in upstate New York."
I mean, yeah, on some level that could almost be this is like a scam, a double scam. Like, you allow Epstein to profit himself and you and let him do whatever he wants, and then later sue the bank he used to do it. Did Richard
But again,
Coppers,
it's not this family.
Sure.
And I don't think they're in office anymore. But I take your point for sure.
Yeah. All right, more Rising right after this.